Hello, everybody. I'm Ron Miscavige, and this is another edition of Life After Scientology. And I have a fabulous guest on today, which is you're going to be enlightened on a lot of things going on within the Church of Scientology with this. But let me get a little bit business out of the way. First of all, if you're new to this, and this is the first time you're watching this, or if you've been watching it in a while and haven't done so, could you please subscribe? And when you do it, press the bell so that whenever we have a new interview or another show of any kind, you'll be notified. And the other thing is this: if you care to contribute to the ongoingness of this, you can become a Patreon and contribute something per month. And if you do, I would appreciate it very much. That helps us to keep going. And as you know, we don't have a sponsor. So we're free to enlighten you on any aspect of anything we talk about. We don't have anybody telling us what we can or can't do. So much for that. So today, I have a very special person on. His name is Joey Chait. I know Joey for many, many years simply because of his father and mother and them coming to the maiden voyage anniversary, actually, which was done every year when I played in the band in the Church of Scientology. I think Joey used to come there with his mom and dad. So much for the introduction. I could go on and on about it because he's an excellent person and a real gentleman. Good morning, Joey.
Good morning, Ron. I'm happy to see your face.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. By the way, how many times did you go to the maiden voyage anniversary?
Every year since the first anniversary, all the way up until the 10th. So for 10 years, basically, 10 years in a row we went.
Yeah. So you saw me on stage all the time.
Oh my God, I saw you every single year, and you're a fantastic musician.
Oh,
so I always look forward to you guys playing.
I appreciate that, and I may be a fantastic musician, but I'm not doing any gigs. It's unbelievable.
I know.
With the coronavirus, they don't have gatherings of people. But anyway,
yeah.
So much for that. Look, let's get into your story because I'm really anxious to get this out to the public. And of course, I know it, and I know a lot of people do it. But how did you become a Scientologist? You're a second generation, is that right?
Second generation. So we, myself and my two younger brothers were basically born into it. My parents got into Scientology in the mid 1970s, and I was born in 1978. So by the time I was born, they had just sort of taken a deep dive into Scientology. And so we were raised in it. We went to Scientology schools. I was trained as a Scientology auditor from a very, very young age, much younger than most people have. Our whole life revolved around Scientology. My parents' business, they own an art gallery and an auction company. The entire business was run based off of Scientology principles. So we were sort of engrossed in it from the time that we were born. So and then I left 36 years later, but for pretty much the entire time, it controls every aspect of your life.
So as a little as a little child, you didn't know anything other than Scientology as far as being raised, as far as being indoctrinated into I was going to call it a religion. Joey, come on, it's not a religion. Okay,
it's a cult.
It's a cult. Yeah.
But we know that now. Yeah.
Hey, listen, I was a Kool-Aid drinker when I was in. You know that.
Yeah.
And I encouraged people to do Scientology, and then when I went in the Sea Organization, I actually encouraged them to join the Sea Org.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of doing a makeup of damage here because I do interviews with people who have gone in and went a similar route to me and got enlightened and said, "Hey, wait a minute, I've been brainwashed." But that must have been interesting because it's not like you even had a choice when you were a kid, did you?
No, you really didn't have a choice. Myself personally, and a lot of other kids that I sort of grew up with, we didn't really have any other options because our parents would be like, "You're going to go to this Scientology school. After school, you're going to go to whatever org you were going to." I went to Celebrity Center when I first started. And they paid for all of our training. They paid for all of our auditing sessions and things like that. So Yeah, we were, and because we were so indoctrinated from a very young age, we didn't have a choice, and we didn't even know there was another choice available. Because when you're in Scientology, especially a kid in Scientology, you are told that Scientology is the only thing that's going to save the planet. It's the only thing that's going to salvage mankind, and there won't be I think what are the aims of Scientology? A world without criminals, a world without war, whatever Hubbard wrote about it. It's
Yeah.
you truly believe that Scientology is the only way to fix any problem in the world.
Yeah.
And if you believe in something so strongly, there really isn't any other option.
Yeah. Now you were trained as an auditor as a kid. How was that? I mean, how old were you when you started getting trained?
I started at 12 or 13 years old, which is very young. It was weird looking back on it, but at the time, a lot of Scientologists, what they'll do, especially the older senior executives of Scientology, whenever you start a course or wherever you finish a course or do your auditing sessions, they praise you. They shower you with love and affection, and they do like that love bombing sort of thing.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, a 12-year-old kid or a 13-year-old kid, oh my God, Joey, you're so amazing. Look at you. You're training to become an auditor. You're going to be the most powerful person on the planet. You're going to save the world. You're going to do these fantastic things. We love you. We support you. Who wouldn't want that? So of course,
Yeah.
me, I'm eating all of this in, and loving it pretty much the whole time. And when you're that brainwashed and when you're that indoctrinated into something, you tend to ignore a lot of the bad stuff and a lot of the things that don't quite seem right for a very, very long time. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah. I could see that, and I understand how that works, because if you're getting validated for something,
Mm-hmm.
you'll continue to do that.
Yes.
And then the other thing is,
Yes.
as a kid or an adult, or it doesn't matter what, you go in to study 5 days a week at least.
At
So
least.
that's at least 5 days a week. You're indoctrinating yourself. You're actually
Yes.
brainwashing yourself.
Correct.
And I know
Correct.
when I got in, I was in my 30s. It was 1970, and I can remember the first courses I did, which I thought were pretty good, especially the communication course,
Yeah.
because you do learn the anatomy of a proper communication, and no matter what, I mean, it does improve your condition in life.
Definitely. There's some
I
value to the communication course.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, so you get that as something that say, hey, wait a minute, this works, and
Hmm.
there's a couple other things, and you consider that they to work. So after that, other things that could be introduced to your mind don't seem right, but you say, oh, I'll accept it because so far everything's been right. Did you feel the
Yes,
same way?
I did. I did. And over the years, as you know, I mean, when you first start in Scientology, everything is sunshine and rainbows and everything is great. The courses aren't too expensive quite yet, but the further you go up, the more expensive they become and the more sinister they become. So you tend to just kind of brush it off to the side, and you see everybody else doing it, and everybody's smiling and happy all the time, pretty much because they have to. Because if you
Yeah,
have any what Scientologists call bad indicators, you get pulled into ethics, or you get pulled in to get corrected. So you have to have a smile on your face the entire time. So you think, well, if it works for them, it's probably going to work for me.
that's a real good point.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good point,
Mm-hmm.
because, well, I'll tell you, it's not the same, but a similar thing happened. There
Mm-hmm.
was when I was in Marine Corps boot camp. I can remember it being so tough. Like the first night is like a living nightmare. I don't know if you ever saw Full Metal Jacket, but
Oh,
that's how it
yes, I
is.
did. Yes, I did.
And then at the end of boot camp, I had a big win. I had the realization I could make myself do anything,
Yeah.
and that was a discipline that I've used my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember saying to Mackenzie, I remember thinking to myself, if Mackenzie can stick it out, I'm going to stick it out. And somebody said, hey, Miscavige, because you called each other by your last name, Miscavige, I said the same thing about you. And
Yeah.
what you're saying is a similar thing, but not in a good way, though.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know what I mean?
Very, very, very similar.
Well, I wanted to get into this, and I'm going to get into it right now. And I'm talking about sexual abuse as a child through giving and receiving auditing. Why don't we go into that? Because this is something that that does go on, and you've had personal experiences with it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, if I could get real personal for a moment,
Go ahead.
there's a lot of children in Scientology. When I was growing up, and there's a lot of children in Scientology now. And in fact, most of the Scientologists now, because you know that they're not getting really a significant number of new members joining. So really the Scientologists that are still sort of holding up the entire Church of Scientology are the second generation kids and their kids. Now, it's pretty well known that L. Ron Hubbard doesn't think a child is really a child. Excuse me. He considers everybody a thetan, or a spirit in a little body. Right. And a thetan, of course, has lived billions and billions of years, according to him. So he doesn't look at children the way that they should be looked at. So all of his policies in regards to auditing applies to adults and to children. So when you have a child that's receiving auditing and getting very specific confessional questions asked of them, like, have you ever raped anyone? Have you ever murdered anybody? Have you ever had sex with a member of your own family? Have you ever, and all of these really disgusting sexual questions. Adults are being asked those questions, and children are being asked those questions, because children are not children in Scientology. So that in of itself is absolute child abuse. Whether it's covert or overt child abuse, it can cause the same amount of trauma. So for myself personally, I was molested by a Scientologist when I guess I was 12 or 13 at the time when it happened. That was just straight up molestation. But as far as the auditing goes, the auditing is so damaging, because what the auditor is doing when they're auditing a child, they're asking the child these really, really deep sexual questions. They're basically sort of like making a cataloging of a child's sexual behaviors. And in auditing, they write everything down. Everything is written down. Everything is being recorded. So all of those auditing folders from people who got auditing when they were children in Scientology, the church is sitting on a treasure trove of pedophilia, and they recorded it, and everything is written down. And a lot of people don't realize that. Even if you've been in Scientology for many, 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 many years, and like we were talking about before, you sort of kind of brush it aside. It's like, well, it doesn't happen that often. Maybe once in a while it happens, but it's not that big of a deal, because we have to look at the greater purpose. But I don't know what your experience with auditing was, Ron, but when I was receiving auditing and giving auditing, sex came up 90% of the time in most sessions.
You're right. As a matter of fact, it's when they're asking you that question, it's almost like they're accusing you of that.
Yes.
So on that accusation, you may think to yourself, maybe I actually did that, and maybe I've hidden it from myself.
Yeah. And then the policies of Hubbard will never ever change. The procedures of auditing will never ever change, because Hubbard's word is gold. It's the scriptures. It will absolutely never change. So whether you're auditing an adult or whether you're auditing a child, it's the same thing. So imagine me getting auditing. There's an adult sitting across the table from me saying, have you ever masturbated? And I'm 13 or 14 years old. Most teenagers masturbate, and he's asking me, have you ever masturbated? I say, okay, yeah, I did 2 nights ago. How did you do it? Well, I and then I go into the explicit detail. And they ask you questions like, which hand did you use? Did you use lubrication? Did you ejaculate? Did you watch pornography? And the adult is writing everything down. They're literally cataloging the sexual behaviors of a child. And when you look at it like that, it's pretty disgusting. And we know for a fact that it's still happening to this day, because the policies will never, ever change. And I don't think they will ever stop auditing children, as far as I know.
No. And I'll tell you something. We will be cleaning car windows with wet newspapers till the end of time, if you listen to L. Ron Hubbard. They could come out with the most significant change. in chemicals where you could just spray it on and the windshield would be cleaned. But you'll still take an old newspaper, wet it, and then clean it with that. And it's
Right.
nothing. His words are considered scripture,
Yes.
which that's a defamation of the English language, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
It is no more scripture than than some pulp fiction novel,
Basically, yeah.
So now let's continue on with this point, because
yeah,
we wrote these down on our bullet points, and then Scientology is basically homophobic. And
completely.
Were you gay as a child? Did you know that you were gay?
I mean, you sort of know, or you have like a little bit of an inkling of it. But especially growing up in Scientology, it's very, very difficult to come to terms with your own sexuality if you're anything but a straight person, because Hubbard, in his own books and lectures, he doesn't have very kind things to say about gay people in general. Even in his Mission Earth series, which is his science fiction books, he portrays homosexuals in those books as these slimy, disgusting, predatory sort of homophobic characters, stereotypical characters. So in his Scientology works and even in his science fiction works, he made no bones about how much he thought that they were horrible criminals. So of course, me as a young kid, having these internal feelings of homosexuality, and then reading what he thought, who I considered to be like a god at some point, telling me that I'm a horrible person, and I'm evil, and the worst type of person is a homosexual. You tend to bury those things. So for years, I didn't really do anything or say anything about it. I was trying to hide my feelings. And then eventually it just got to the point where I couldn't hold it anymore. I had grown up, I got into my early to mid 20s, and I'm sort of becoming an adult and finally admitting to them that I'm gay. And they were like, whoa, hold on a second. You can't be gay in Scientology. We need to fix it. We need to handle that, as they say.
Yeah.
So what Scientology is really, really good at is taking things that you think are wrong with you or they think are wrong with you and giving you a program that you have to pay for to fix it. So they sold me, I don't remember how many hundreds of hours of auditing to try to handle this problem. And I'm going through these auditing processes, and they're basically telling me I'm a disgusting pig for being gay. But it's okay. Scientology can help you with that, and we're going to fix you. And nothing was getting fixed. And so finally, I just stopped going. I just sort of, maybe I was like 30 or 33 years old. I just stopped going to auditing. I stopped going to course and just kind of slowly backed away and started living my own life. And quite frankly, it was more exhilarating and more freeing to be able to do that than any auditing session that I had ever had before.
Oh, I can see why. I mean, you're going against the grain totally.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, I think that's the best way to put it. You're going against the grain totally. You feel a certain way, and they're trying to erase the way you feel.
Right.
It's almost like them giving you auditing to a person that you're in love with, and they're trying to indoctrinate you that you should hate that person.
Yes.
It's bad stuff, man. I'll tell you, no matter how you cut it.
Yeah.
And I know, like in Science of Survival, he talks about a homosexual person as being a 1-1, which is covert hostility. They'll stab you in the back if they get a chance, and you can't trust them. And they're the worst piece of shit that ever lived, So you were making a little bit light of it, and that we were saying he was bad things. No, these are horrible things,
Horrible.
Yeah.
And when you hear other Scientologists saying it, I heard my parents say it. When they would encounter a gay person, out in the real world or at work or something like that. Oh, he's so 1-1 and he's so slimy and disgusting, and they're saying this in front of me. So years and years and years of this type of it develops into trauma, and it's really horrible for kids to go through stuff like that. And I promise I'm not the only kid that has ever been gay and gone through Scientology. I'm sure there's many, many, many others that went through very similar things.
Yeah.
So,
well, did you ever go in the Sea Org? Joey?
I did. I was in the Sea Org for 3 years or 4 years, I think. Yeah.
When was that? How old were you when you joined?
So I was in the middle of auditing on OT3 as a public, and then when I was in the middle of doing that, I think I just turned 18 at the time. So as soon as I turned 18, a couple of months later, I went and joined the Sea Org. And then they sent me to Flag for training. I was at Flag for 6 months, and they wanted me to become a Class 9 auditor. But then in the middle of all that, they changed it and made me a course supervisor.
Now, hang on a second. Just so our audience can get it. When you're saying Class 9, what does that mean, Joey?
So there's different levels, obviously, in Scientology on that little gradation chart. You start from the bottom and you go up higher.
Right.
So Class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Class 9 are the auditors that are trained to deliver the upper OT levels, more particularly OT5, which is one of those confidential levels that you pay a lot of money for to get up to. I think Class 9 auditors are probably the most expensive auditors. They charge like $700 or $800 an hour, I think, for some of those auditing sessions. So,
right, and that you then have the capability of auditing out body thetans. Is that right?
Exactly.
In other words, you're auditing a person to help them get rid of their body thetans.
Right, and a body thetan, of course, is what Scientology believes are little people, other thetans that are stuck to your body or stuck in your sort of general vicinity. And the only way to get rid of them is to basically to talk to them and find out what their problem is and try to handle it, and then they leave. And the idea in Scientology is that when you get up to these confidential levels or the OT levels, you get rid of these body thetans slowly but surely. They're coming off of you, and then eventually you won't have any more of them, and it's just you, the one thetan that's still attached to your body.
Yeah.
Which is so schizophrenic. Every time I tell the story to someone, I can't believe I actually believed that garbage when I was in it.
Well, you did, and so did I, and so did a lot of people. So forgive yourself. What the hell, you know?
We all did.
Everybody is entitled to make a mistake or many mistakes.
Yeah.
But if you don't learn from your mistakes, then you are an idiot.
Right. Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
And I do a couple different shows. I do one that's called Life Lessons. I do another one called Story Time. I also have a little exercise device that I discovered some months ago.
Yes.
And basically, I found it because I was looking for something for my fellow veterans to work out with, Marines or Army guys, whatever, and something that would be inexpensive. So I do a show on that. And one of the life lessons I gave was this life lesson. What is the hardest thing you will ever do? Do you know what it is?
No.
Admit you were wrong.
That's very, very difficult to do.
To look in the mirror and say, I was conned. That takes some courage. And I can remember a good friend of mine, Fernando Gamboa, one time we're talking about it, and he's an ex-Scientologist. We were in the Sea Org together. And actually one of my best friends ever. I love Fernando. But we're talking about it, and he says, Ronnie, let's face it, we were conned.
We were. I mean,
and I got off the phone,
really
and I have a big mirror in the hallway here, and I looked at myself. I actually did this, and I said, "Man, you were conned," and I meant it. Yeah. At that point, I started peeling off all the bullshit that was. And anyway, go on. You were going to say something. I kind of I apologize for that.
No worries. No, but what I was going to say is that it's hard to admit that. And my parents and a lot of the first generation of Scientologists that are still alive, that grew up that got into Scientology themselves, and now their kids are in Scientology. It's got to be so hard for them to admit that they were wrong and to admit that they were conned, because an entire lifetime of utter devotion and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. My parents have donated $5 million to the International Association of Scientologists. So to walk away from all of that and be like, that was total BS, it's hard for anybody to do that. So I see why a lot of them are still in, because they can't they can't let go of it, and they can't
Nope.
admit to themselves that they were conned, just like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. And not only that, that that is the hardest thing. But along with that goes you're being disconnected from your friends, your family. If you have
Yes.
a job with a Scientology employer, you're going to lose that job that day. You know, if
Yeah.
you come out and say anything against Scientology, saying, "Hey, you know what? This is a con." But I will say this: it is clever. It is probably the cleverest scam I've ever run into.
It's brilliant. It's a
I
brilliant
mean,
scam.
it is brilliant because. So then, how was your time in the Sea Org? Then let's get into that a little further. Then.
Whoa. The Sea Org was unpleasant, and that's definitely putting it lightly. You know how the Sea Org is.
Of course.
Unbelievable difficult schedule, barely any sleep. The food is garbage. You barely have time to do anything or see anything. They promise you get 1 day off every other week if your statistics are up, and 3 weeks of vacation every year. Nobody ever takes it. The physical abuse, when I was in the Sea Org, I've been screamed at, I've been yelled at. I had one of the RTC representatives. RTC stands for Religious Technology Center. That's the top of the command chain in Scientology. An RTC representative who was working in my organization at the time, she came up and smacked me up the side of the head just randomly one day because my statistics were down for the past week. I've had a lamp thrown at my face. I've been punched in the stomach. A lot of sexual rapes and statutory rapes that have been covered up by Scientology. Countless. I could tell stories for hours about that type of thing. A lot of myself auditing other people. So I became the auditor, and I was sort of their counselor or their therapist. And they're telling me all kinds of crimes. Like, I'm hearing stories about pedophilia. I'm hearing stories about molestation. I'm hearing stories about embezzlement and illegal things. And me, of course, being the perfect Scientology robot zombie who was trained to do the auditing exactly per L. Ron Hubbard's words, I'm sitting there going, I'm writing everything down. Thank you for telling me that. When was that? Thank you. Where did that happen? Thank you. Is that all to that? And I mean, you know the whole pattern. There's just a whole
Of
pattern
course.
of questions, and just having to audit adults and telling me about their sexual habits and all these other things, and asking for explicit detail, of everything that happened, and that stuff it sticks with you. Even when I was a kid, there was one time that I audited an adult who told me about how he had molested his 6-year-old niece. So I'm here like 14 years old trying to be this man's therapist, and him telling me all this disgusting stuff, and I'm writing everything down. And the biggest, the thing that makes me the most angry is that I contributed to it because I didn't realize it at the time, but also because they're sort of getting away with it because they're protected under religious freedom. And all of those files, the treasure trove of criminality and evidence that they're sitting on top of, I hope they'll get to it eventually, but it's going to be really, really difficult for a government to go in and to try to look into it and prosecute people, because they are a recognized religion in the United States. They're completely protected. They have billions of dollars, and they have a team of lawyers that will do everything that they can to block that sort of thing from happening.
Yeah, and you're trained not to report that stuff when it's told to you, isn't that right?
You're told that you are not allowed to go to any authority. You're not allowed to go to the police. You're not allowed to go to any government. The only person that you're allowed to report that type of stuff to is the internal Scientology ethics officer, or the person who works at the Office of Special Affairs. And their entire job is basically to cover it up and to make sure that it doesn't make the church look bad. Their number one job is to protect the image of the Church of Scientology. And that's all that they care about. They don't care that these lives are being ruined. They don't care that these children are being molested. All they care about is the reputation of the church. That's it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you another thing to add to what you just said. If you were to report that, that's considered a high crime.
It's considered a high crime, and that's written by Hubbard in the ethics book.
Yeah.
If you report a crime to an outside agency other than an internal Scientology person, you could get in ethics trouble for it yourself, and you might get declared a suppressive person and get kicked out of the church, and you lose your friends, you lose your family, you lose your job if you work for a Scientology company. It's horrible.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I lost my family.
I know. Same.
I lost my two daughters, and my great grandchildren on my daughter's side. I've never. I don't even know how many I have. I might as well be dead to them.
Heartbreaking.
Now, mind you, I'm in comm with my son Ronnie, and my granddaughter Jenna, and they're two wonderful kids. I mean, they're just beautiful children, and I enjoy them. But other than that, my two daughters, their children,
and the grandchildren,
they're done with me.
It's heartbreaking. It's
heartbreaking.
And it happens. It happens every day in Scientology.
Yeah. Well, that's the reason. That's the reason I do this. Okay.
That's sure.
The reason I interview other people, and I'd like to get into like when you finally started talking out against it.
Yeah.
Let's get into that. Yeah. Like, how did that start, even?
Well, I had sort of backed off from Scientology in my early 30s, and I was just sort of quietly going on the internet and reading books and watching YouTube videos. At the time, I was reading Marty Rathbun's blog when he was critical of Scientology. I was watching YouTube videos of ex-Scientologists, and it was pretty shocking to see, because when you're in Scientology, you're trained to not look at anything that's happening on the outside world. So if you come across a newspaper article that says anything negative about Scientology, your initial reaction or your initial response is to close the newspaper and not look at it. Something pops on the television or something pops up on the internet. You're so brainwashed into shutting it off, and you're taught not to look. So once I finally started looking, I was terrified that I was going to get in trouble for it. So slowly over the course of a couple of years, I started doing it. And then I started reaching out to people who I knew that had left Scientology. And I was like on the phone with them, I can't talk to you very long. I'm afraid this call is going to be tapped. I was so paranoid about getting in trouble. So finally, I just couldn't take the BS anymore. This was in 2016, I think. I was 36 years old. And I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to start telling my story. And the way that I did it is a little interesting, because when I was working for my parents, I was working in their art gallery, and there was a little bit of an issue with the federal government, particularly the Department of Fish and Wildlife, because we used to sell antiques. And a lot of those antiques were made out of things like ivory, which of course comes from elephants, and elephants are protected species. And so they had a little bit of concern about smuggling, which never happened. As far as I know, never happened. I don't know what my dad was doing necessarily. But there were some other like little minor crimes and things like that. So for a number of years, I was sort of going back and forth between the government, and they were like, okay, well, we're going to charge you with something. So they ended up I ended up making a deal with them, basically. And the agreement was that I was going to plead guilty to making a false or fictitious invoice on a customs form. And there was some possibility of a little bit of jail time, but they said it was minimal and there might be a fine or whatever. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll plead guilty to that, and I'll just sort of go along with this whole thing. So during my sentencing, anybody that goes in front of a judge for sentencing, they want to know about your background. They want to know about your family history. They want to know about your schooling. They want to kind of get a whole picture of the person before the judge hands down a sentence. So what I did and my lawyer did is we wrote up a whole brief, like a whole sentencing brief, and gave it to the judge and talked about all of the abuse growing up in Scientology, all of the sexual abuse and the physical abuse, and sort of painted a picture of what it's like to work for a company that's run by Scientologists, aka my parents, and how Scientology sort of injects itself into every facet of the life. And the judge heard it, and the judge said, he's like, yeah, I get it. You grew up in a cult. You grew up with Scientology parents. I get it. So he gave me a much lesser sentence than the government was asking for. And it was my first offense. And, he was like, listen, you apologize. You know what you did was wrong. So I ended up serving 8 months in prison. It was one of those federal prisons, like a prison camp. So there's no perimeter fence around it. It's for nonviolent. Most of the people that I was in prison with were like people who had embezzled some money, or doctors or pharmacists who committed Medicare fraud, stuff like that. Anyway, so that's how I actually came out as an ex-Scientologist, was in court in front of a judge telling my story.
But now the actual charge,
Mm-hmm.
did you actually do that, or did your dad actually do that?
No, I actually did falsify the customs form. Long story short, there was an undercover agent from the Department of Fish and Wildlife that came into the gallery, purchased a piece of a Chinese carving that was made out of rhinoceros horn, which there used to be a lot of carvings that are like that. And basically what the undercover agent did, pretending to be the buyer, said, "Hey, I want you to ship this piece to Canada." And I said, "No, we can't ship it out of the country because it needs special permits and stuff. So it can't really, we can't ship it for you." So the undercover agent said, "How about this? How about you make me an invoice that says that it's something else, like plastic or bone or something like that?" And I said, "Yes." Because they have me saying yes to that question on a recording, that's making conspiracy to, what was the charge? Conspiracy to make a false or fictitious invoice on a customs form.
Okay, yeah. So somehow I had the impression that your dad actually did it and you took the fall for him.
No. So I did that. So they thought there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on. They thought that we were, smuggling ivory, and they thought that we were hiding elephant tusks under the floorboards of the company, but obviously none of that happened to my knowledge. But myself personally, I actually did do the invoice thing. So I took full responsibility for that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now your dad went up to the highest level in Scientology, and he hasn't fared too well from that, has he?
No. So there was the whole government investigation that happened in 2014 or 2015, and shortly after that, he had a massive heart attack. He was in a coma for 6 months, and he's got all kinds of medical problems and stuff like that. So he's not doing very well. The company, from what I hear, I don't work there anymore, obviously, but the company isn't doing very well either. Over the course of working with the government to try to come up with a plea deal or a plea bargain, there was a lot of stuff that I think my dad was doing or other members of my family were doing that were not so kosher.
Yeah,
at least. But of course, I didn't know any of that stuff was going on at the time, and it's very hard to. Initially, what the government was doing, they were going after my dad. So during the process of the investigation, that's when he had the heart attack, and he went into a coma for 6 months, and he had a little bit of brain damage because when he had the heart attack, his heart stopped beating, and he didn't get enough oxygen to his brain for, I think they said like 13 or 14 minutes or something. So he's not 100% there. So once they determined that he was probably not fit to stand trial, they went down to the next person, which of course is me, because I'm the oldest son.
I got it.
Yeah. So his health is not great. I don't think my mother's health is great either. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years, but from what I hear, both of them are not doing very well. And they got to the top of the bridge.
I know.
And the highest level of Scientology, and they're not at cause, which is what they say you're supposed to be.
Yeah, you're supposed to be cause over life, and it's a good story to get your money, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm being very gracious when I say that, because I knew both your mom and your dad, and I personally liked them. I didn't know them that well because I don't even meet them on the ship. But they're very nice people in my eyes. That's how I felt.
They were lovely. They were lovely back in the day, when they were younger, and I'm sure back in the day, and you could attest to this too, because back in the day in the 70s in Scientology, it didn't cost that much money.
Oh,
there wasn't this this environment of just the constant asking for money. There was very, very little ethics things happening and people constantly getting into trouble. So I can see how it could be attractive to a lot of people to join at that time.
Absolutely. I'll tell you,
Yeah,
in the 70s when I got in, it was a totally different scene. And you
absolutely.
could go up the bridge for like $5,000 or $6,000, period.
Easily,
Yeah.
easily.
So anyway, okay, so I think we've gotten the story out, and I appreciate that. But now you're doing well in life, and you're doing something that,
Yeah.
did you ever figure you'd do this after you were an auditor?
No.
Okay, why don't
No.
you tell everybody what you're doing? Because I think it's wonderful.
So I am a substance abuse counselor for a residential rehab facility. The residential rehab facility, we get clients in who are coming off of drugs or alcohol, and we go through their whole detox procedures, and they stay for residential treatment, usually for about 30 days for that whole process. And I counsel them, and I actually learned proper studied tools to help people kick their addiction habits. And it's fascinating to me to be doing this now, because for so many years when I was in Scientology, I was an auditor and I thought that I was actually helping people, which of course wasn't the case. I was damaging the hell out of them. But now I'm actually doing something that actually helps people, and you can actually see the change in people with no caveats or conditions attached to it, like there are in Scientology.
Yeah.
So I got into this about 2 years ago, and I love it. I love dealing with addicts, and actually like going through the motions of them and seeing them come in completely drunk or completely high, giving them proper medications now, because before, Scientologists don't actually take prescription medications unless it's
Right.
approved, but actually giving them the medications that they need in order to get through the detox portion, and working with doctors and working with the psychiatrists and working with the other therapists and things like that, and actually getting a person to be in a better state. It's marvelous.
Yeah, and you're actually changing their condition, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, and not bullshit. I mean, just
Like
actually.
actually changing their condition. And
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I get to see them walk in the door disheveled and just broken, and then they walk out the other end of the door 30 days later, they're a completely different person with hopes and dreams, and they're ready to go and kick ass out in the world, basically.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it.
And I'm happy for you. I'm happy that you had that change, and that's well done on breaking the shackles of your own mind. Actually, if I don't mind saying that, isn't that true though?
It's true.
It's your own mind that has you trapped.
Like you said before, you're brainwashing yourself. You're paying to brainwash yourself in Scientology, and it really is. It's sort, the term gets thrown around all the time. The prison of belief, the prison of the mind. It really is. Yeah. And you have to break yourself out of prison. I didn't break out of prison, but when I got out of prison, it was part of that whole process of physically going out of prison and mentally coming out of prison.
Yep, and I admire you for it, and I'm very happy that you come on the program, Joey.
Thank you.
This is refreshing for me to see you actually change your life for the way better.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is good, and it's good for people to see this, because you can make a change, and you have to have the courage to that first move, which is, hey, wait a minute, I was conned,
Yeah. I'm one of the lucky ones. There were kids that I grew up with that some of them got out, luckily, and they're doing so much better, but some of them don't. And I've had a couple of friends over the last, 20 years or so, they commit suicide because the thought of losing their family and and friends completely walking away from them, and taking all the money away too, because sometimes like they're in the family business like I was.
Yeah.
And they literally would be homeless on the street. They feel like they don't have any other choice. So I think that the more we get our messages out, the more people we can hopefully save from the dangerous cult of Scientology. That's it,
And I'm going to end the show with that statement, because I couldn't have said it better. I got to tell you, let's do a little business, and we're going to close down. And
perfect.
That was a great statement. Anybody who's watching this, go back and rewind this video and listen to it again. But anyway, this is Life After Scientology. And if you want to contribute to the ongoingness of this, you can go on to my website, which is therealronmiscavige.com, and become a Patreon, which I would appreciate very much. And otherwise, if you're not a subscriber yet, please do subscribe and continue watching these. I'm sure you're going to get more enlightened as we go on, and more people tell stories that are not dissimilar from each other's. They all have that common thread. And this was a great breakaway story where you're successful now and you're doing well in life. And I wish you continued success, Joey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you for having me too. I would love to come back whenever you want.
Well, we may just do that. And
Great.
for right now, as I say, this is Life After Scientology. I'm Ron Miscavige. I'm your host. And Joey, you want to say goodbye to everybody?
Bye, everybody. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you for listening to my story. I really, really appreciate it.
Great. See you all in the next one. Bye-bye for now.